There is so much money in vaccines, and pharma has so much money that they are able to push a narrative however they like. They run everything. I mean, they fund the politicians, they fund the news, they fund the journals, they fund the medical schools, they fund everything in part. So they have a lot of influence everywhere. And I don't think it's nefarious. I just think it's really good marketing and really good PR. And they knowingly push positive spin on everything, and anything that seems somewhat negative, they're able to squash it or make it or minimize it because they have the power to do that. Like, if the number one thing people want to talk to you about is vaccines, parents have a lot of questions about vaccines. So you get into that integrative space because they're just a little more educated, I think, on the topic, and they're more hesitant just in general. And the more, over the years, the more questions I got, the more I had to research, think about it, look into it, because there was a lot of stuff that I just didn't actually know. Mostly since I never thought I'd be writing a vaccine book or talking about vaccines, but here we are.
And here we are, yeah. Today's guest is Dr. Joel Gator Warsh, a board-certified pediatrician out of LA who's redefining what it means to raise healthy kids in a sick society. He's the founder of Integrative Pediatrics and Medicine, author, speaker, and the creator of Raising Amazing, helping parents reclaim common sense and confidence in a system that profits off of fear and confusion. Joel is known for speaking the truth most doctors won't, that good health is built in kitchens and gardens, not in pharmacies. And in a world where giving kids more pills is called science, while teaching them to eat real food and play outside is labeled anti-science, Joel's out here bridging the gap with logic, compassion, and backbone. So this one's for the parents and anyone who's done with outsourcing their family's health to big pharma. Dr. Joel, welcome to the show, brother.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Was that intro to your satisfaction?
It was my satisfaction. I mean, anyone that's not calling me names, I'll take it, honestly, that's happening that much, but, with social media nowadays, it's like...
Yeah, but it must happen a little bit, right?
Oh, it certainly happens it's a little bit. It's actually a lot less than I thought it would. When I was working on doing a vaccine book, I was, really ready for some intense craziness and all sorts of mean things, and very surprising so far. It's been actually great. Mostly I've not seen a lot of hate, and that's been really nice. And also, when I started writing a book about vaccines, it was a very different time. You really couldn't talk much about it on social media or anywhere, but now you can, which is, I think, very helpful, and very nice to see that people are open to talking about.
What do you think happened? Why are people open to talk about this? Like, before COVID, I never heard anybody talk about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, before COVID, it was censored. Certainly during COVID, it was by far the most censored. And I think that really led to a pushback. I think because of all that censorship, and because so much of the censorship was wrong, or just not at least totally correct, I think that people really realized that was just not the way forward. And I don't think that most people even realized that the topic of vaccines was censored, or didn't really care about it. I mean, most people didn't care about vaccines. They got them when they were kids. They haven't thought about it in 20 or 30 years. And then all of a sudden you're being, essentially forced to do something, and having to really think about this topic, and then seeing all this censorship. So I think that there was this massive pushback to censorship. And so now we're on the other end of it, where people are, even if they don't necessarily agree with what everybody says, they want the availability of everyone's opinion.
And I want to get into your origin story. So what moment or experience cracked you open and made you start questioning the mainstream narrative around medicine or parenting, or when it comes to your book, also vaccines?
I think for me, there's not one specific moment. Like some people, I think for me, it's kind of a slow change over the last decade. I would say that the most significant would be meeting my now wife during medical training. She's very holistic minded, so that certainly opened up my mind to a little bit of a different perspective, and kind of seeing things outside of modern medicine, and seeing how much better I felt after eating healthier, and just thinking about those sorts of things. So I think that was maybe the first big step. And then from there, I started doing some integrative training, and that really opened up my eyes, because when you go through modern medicine, you're like, oh, this stuff's all woo-woo, it's all crazy. That's kind of what you hear. And then you go do a functional medicine course, and you're like, wow, this is really interesting. Like, why are we not thinking like this? Nothing about this is woo at all. Like, why would we not think about diet and exercise and sleep and that? So that, I think that kind of pushed me in that direction. And then because I was interested in integrative medicine and started practicing in integrative medicine, I started having patients come to me, of course, that were more holistic minded. And you very quickly realize when you're in that space that the number one thing people want to talk to you about is vaccines. And parents have a lot more questions about vaccines as
Um,
you get into that integrative space because they're just a little more educated, I think, on the topic, and they're more hesitant just in general. And the more over the years, the more questions I got, the more I had to research, think about it, look into it, because there was a lot of stuff that I just didn't actually know. And you don't really realize that you don't know it because when you're in kind of mainstream medicine, it's like, well, here's your schedule, here are the horrible diseases, here are how great these vaccines work, go do it, do your schedule. And there's not much questioning out of mainstream medicine or out of your training, and you don't really think about it. But I had no choice. I had to start answering these questions, and I didn't know the answers to a lot of them. And with as we talked about first, like with COVID, I just got so frustrated, like I think so many people did, and I decided, well, if I'm gonna talk about this, I have to be as educated as possible because it's obviously such a controversial topic. So that's what made me write the book and really do the deep dive, and that's what I've been doing, mostly since. I never thought I'd be writing a vaccine book or talking about vaccines, but here we are.
and here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like from your point of view, what did we actually go through during the pandemic? What truths or perspectives do you think most people still haven't woken up to? I hate using that word, but I'm using it here.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, it's still so hard to know. I think you have very wildly different opinions on this from like, the COVID vaccine was the best thing ever and it saved millions of lives and saved trillions of dollars. So the other end of it where it was, it's horrible. No one should ever taken it. It's killing more people. It's causing more side effects. It's not really
Mm.
helping. And you never really hear debate between the two sides. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what to believe. I think we had some sort of new virus, whether it was from a lab or whatnot. I mean, that's what makes the most sense to me, but hard to know. Again, it's like, there's still the mainstream medicine narrative that it's like, oh, like, it came from a wet market and one animal, touched another animal. I don't know. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not, but it just seems like
Is that still the narrative?
that's still the mainstream opinion. But I think that
Yeah.
that's changed a lot over
Mm.
time. And I think that it's not, if you said, oh, it was from a lab leak a few years ago, that would make you censored. I don't think that's a censored position anymore. I think a lot of people feel that way, and there are certainly some evidence that maybe that's true. But either way, we had a virus. It went around. Um, People with lots of comorbidities didn't do so well with it, and I think that for the most part, young healthy people did fine. Obviously, some people got really sick, but some people get really sick from everything. Uh,
Mm.
and you probably had a vaccine that helped a little bit at first and maybe decrease your risk of severe disease at first, maybe, but how much it affected you and what kind of complications came with that and whether that was a worthwhile benefit, I think is still up in the air. Because depending on who you ask, I mean, a lot of people think that the COVID vaccine is causing a lot more problems than it's helping. And I think certainly now is different than back then. I think the benefit is very minimal at this point. And not necessarily zero, but I think the benefit is not that high, and the risk is certainly seemingly getting higher and higher.
Mm. So if we would go through that exact same scenario and you were the president of the world, how would we tackle a such a pandemic? Would we even speak about it or even warn people about it?
I think you would. I mean, I think if there's something that's going around, we have to go back to the beginning, right? And at
Yeah.
that point, who knows what we actually knew? But for the most part, let's assume we only knew what we knew and what we were told. So when you're starting a new pandemic, you don't know all the details, and that's fine. I mean, you only know what you know. I think by far the biggest error and the thing that needs to be different is forcing people to do something. I think there's nothing wrong with creating a vaccine. There's nothing wrong with offering a vaccine. There's nothing wrong with saying, well, this is something we've only had for a few months, and here's the data that we have so far. And we feel like the benefits outweigh the risks. We just don't know all the risks. And so if you choose that you want to take it, then here you go. And if you choose not to take it, then that's your choice. And I think if we did that, most people wouldn't be so angry right now, because ultimately, when something's new, you may decide, well, this seems like it gives me benefit. I want to take the risk. I know there's a risk. But as soon as you start forcing it, especially something that's new, that's where you run into a lot of issues. And I think that's got to change. And I would love, if it was possible, if I was totally in charge, to be like, all right, companies have to like de-identify the information and provide it so that more people can kind of look at it, especially if you're going to talk about some sort of emergency use. Like maybe the original data needs to be available so that way multiple people can kind of look at it. If we're pushing something out quickly, then we shouldn't trust a company to give us information. Everything should be available, so that way we can provide as much information as possible, because it's such a short amount of time, and that way people can make the best educated decisions based on that, as opposed to trusting a company that stands to make billions. I don't know that we should do that. I mean, again, it's like, it's not that they're nefarious. Like, is a pharma company nefarious? No, they want to make money. Like, that's their job. So they're going to present things in the best possible light. We know that. I mean, that's what you would do if you were in charge of a business. So it's our job to kind of keep them in check.
And like, I totally agree. And how do you make sense of the orchestrated push to getting the vaccine?
I think it was such a. I mean, I think overall, it's the same as everything when it comes to vaccines, is that there is so much money in vaccines, and pharma has so much money that they are able to push a narrative however they like. They run everything. I mean, they fund the politicians, they fund the news, they fund the journals, they fund the medical schools, they fund everything in part. So they have a lot of influence everywhere. And I don't think it's nefarious. I just think it's really good marketing and really good PR, and they knowingly push a positive spin on everything, and anything that seems somewhat negative, they're able to squash it or make it, or minimize it, because they have the power to do that. Like, if some news company is like, oh, this new product has a problem, they can go to the CEO of the company and be like, why are you guys talking about this? This isn't true. Here's the truth. Get rid of that person. And they're able to do that. So I think there's that people just kind of fall in line and kind of give one story based on what is best for the company and not always best for us. And again, I don't think that the specific people are evil. I'm sure there are some evil people, but I think it's just there's a push behind all this money that kind of sends a story forward, and then everyone just kind of falls in line without even knowing it. I think a lot of doctors are like, well, here's what the research shows. It shows that it benefits you. We should do it. And they're doing that because they want to help their patients, but they don't realize they're getting a pharma spin research that maybe isn't all the truth. Maybe it is, but a lot of times it's not, because they have an incentive to show you the best possible outcome for their product.
Mm, makes sense. And I love your Instagram because, especially when you hold up this big sign and you have like this short statement. And in one of them, you wrote, "Science seeks truth, pharma seeks sales," on what you're speaking about right now. So, how can the average parent tell when science is being used to inform and when it's being used to sell? Is this even possible?
I mean, it's very hard now. I
It's
think it's
very
really
hard.
hard.
I also think it's really hard, even though I've been like learning about natural health and taking care of my own body. Of course, I seek doctors' advice when I need to, and go to the hospital when there's a real emergency. I'm really grateful for that. But generally, I don't go to the doctors to for like small reasons. I try to stay in control of my own health, but I think it's freaking really hard, and I really try to do a great job to be informed.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and I think what you're saying is the correct kind of mentality, because I would say at this point it's basically impossible to disentangle pharma and money from science, because it's just so ingrained in everything. That doesn't mean you shouldn't trust science or it's not useful. I think it is. It's the best that we have, but you're not going to get something that's completely unbiased almost at all anymore, because the companies are pushing their products and pushing the science around their products. I mean, you can look at the disclosures. A lot of times, if you look at a study, there's all these disclosures from companies that kind of push the product. It's their research. Doesn't mean, again, the research is wrong, but there's just some influence. And it's the same thing if you're a researcher. You can be like, I'm totally unbiased, but the funding for you might come from a company. The funding for your school might come from a company. You say something bad about a company, you're going to lose your funding. I mean, everybody knows all these things. So there's no real way anymore, unless you're like a billionaire doing your own research, to and even then you've been influenced your whole life, right? Like for example, for doctors, you can think you're unbiased, but doctors are literally trained about pharmaceutical medicine. That's not unbiased. Like, pharma has done that over the years. We're not really trained in natural medicine anymore. We've been trained in a pharmaceutical model. Here's your symptoms, here's your pill. And not all of pharma is bad. I mean, there are amazing medications that we have, but can you disentangle that? No, I mean, that's what we've been trained in for the last 20 years. So you
Mhm.
that mentality. So you can't disentangle it totally, but I think the key is listen to multiple different sources. Try not to just get one opinion. Try to follow people that seem like they're very genuine in terms of what they say. They change their mind. They can kind of go through things. They can think critically. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to make the best decision based on the information you have. And like with something like vaccines, bringing it back to that, there's a lot of information we just don't have, but you still have to make a decision. So ultimately, if you can kind of take in differing viewpoints on a subject, then you can kind of get an overall picture, and that can hopefully help you make an educated decision. Now, are some of those opinions biased? I'm sure they are, but at least you get the kind of full picture as best as you can on bigger decisions.
Mm. Could you take us into your practice and tell us about how does a conversation with with a parent go when it comes to the vaccine schedule?
Yeah, well, for me, yeah, I guess it goes back to my beliefs in that I shouldn't be telling people what to do. We should be having discussions and educating and helping parents to make the best decision that's right for them. And that's the way that I talk about vaccines in my practice. That's how things go here. That's how I talk about things in the book. I don't tell people what to do, and I just try to provide the best information that I can. And in the practice, we have people that do the regular schedule. We have people that do a slow schedule. Some people don't do it. And I think that should be up to each person to decide. So usually when we're talking about it, I try to help them to understand the risks versus the benefits. So what do we know about the vaccines? What do we know about the diseases? How deadly they are? How likely are you to come in contact with that disease? If you do get that disease, then how likely is it that you're going to get really sick or die? Versus what we know about the risks of vaccines and then what we don't know. So that's usually how I try to take people through, which is the same thing that I did in the book, which is try to take people through that thought process to help them understand what we do and do not know. So you can kind of understand, like, okay, which diseases are most risky? What might you actually come in contact with? What haven't we seen in 40 years? So at least if you're weighing, oh, I'm going to do some of the vaccines, then which one's more likely to have some benefit?
Mm. So if there's two scenarios, this is like a really black and white question, but if a family with a healthy child would choose not to vaccinate at all, and another family with a healthy child choose to do the full schedule, which one of those scenarios would you give you the most peace of mind in your gut
Um,
feeling?
I don't know. I don't know if either one because I think that there's so much we just don't know about vaccines and the risks that it's really hard. So to me right now, I think it's really hard to know ultimately what is the best way forward until we get the long-term studies that we understand
Mm,
what the risks are from vaccines. I think that's a huge missing piece of the puzzle that's really important because I think ultimately for most kids, the risk of getting a disease that we have a vaccine for right now is very low. And even if you do get it, your risk of having serious complications is very low, not zero,
mm,
but
mm,
very low. If everybody stops vaccinating, that risk is going to become much higher. So that would change things in terms of your risk. But then I think with the vaccines, we have a good understanding of your short term risks. We don't have a good understanding of your long term risks. And we have a chronic disease epidemic. And I think if vaccines are contributing to chronic disease, that really changes the equation a lot. And then you really have to start thinking, well, which vaccine should we prioritize? Which are the most important? Do we need all of these? Yes, there's a risk of some of these diseases, but does that still mean you should do a vaccine just because we have a small risk? Like those are the kind of things that I think weigh in there. So I think ultimately either decision you'd probably be okay right now, but that could change, very significantly. And I think we need that long-term data to really reassess the childhood vaccine schedule and see if it's really the best thing in the way that we do it for our kids moving forward because it's not just about protecting against diseases, right? And that's the part that I think medicine gets wrong or just isn't willing to acknowledge right now. Like, I don't want any kid to die of a disease, right? I don't want any kid to get
yeah, of
measles or
course.
get really sick, but I also don't want a kid to have a bad reaction or to have asthma or allergies or autism or autoimmune conditions if it's something that we can prevent. So both things can be true. And if we're unwilling to talk about the risks, then you're really doing kids a disservice because there may be some middle ground, or maybe there's some ingredients or something that we're doing that we could change. And if we were to say, hey, like the Hep B vaccine increases your risk of asthma by 10 times
Mm,
older. Well, okay, but why? Like, that doesn't mean we shouldn't protect against Hep B, but like maybe there's an ingredient you could take out or change. Maybe you do something differently, and they don't have that risk. So you want to protect I mean, I want to protect the most kids from disease with the most minimal risk from those products, and that's not anti-vaccine or anti-science. And I think
Mm,
that's kind of the mentality that most people that are called anti-vax have. They're not against vaccines, but there's just not a lot of discussion around safety of vaccines. It's like, oh, they're just safe. They're totally safe. And you're like, well, based on what? Based on what information? We have not studied them long term. Not really.
mm. And I want to continue on this topic. Do you know, like, around approximately how many families do you know that haven't gone through the vaccine schedule at all? They just said no to vaccines that
I
you
mean,
followed up with.
in terms of patients, is probably a few percent in the practice that get zero. But I mean, overall, it's like about 1%. In America, I think they're
1%.
yeah, 1 to 2% of kids get zero vaccines in
Yeah,
America. So it's something around there, but it's probably high. It's higher in my practice.
yeah. And this is not I'm not doing studies, but just from my own experience, having around, like, I think it's around 10 families that I know of that haven't taken any vaccines. And what I hear often that they report when we speak to each other is that their kids are, like, a lot healthier than most of the kids at their schools or their siblings' kids. And if they get sick, they often get, like, they rebound much quicker
Hmm. Yeah,
than the kids that are, like, in their near peer group.
that is my experience as well. And the what I have anecdotally heard from basically everybody who knows unvaccinated kids or who has taken care of unvaccinated kids. It
Mm,
may be biased. I don't know. Those kids are probably living a little bit different lifestyle. A lot of kids that are unvaccinated don't go to school. So I think there's certainly some things that are different there. But overall,
mm,
that is what I've always heard from everybody who takes care of both or who knows people that are both. So I think that's an important point, that it shouldn't be overlooked, and it's very consistent. Uh,
mm,
but ultimately, you also have to keep in mind that there is obviously some increased risk there from the actual diseases.
mm,
But yeah, I think that's the most important point. I mean, I think that's the thing that needs to be discussed and should be reasonably looked at. Like, is it true that a kid who's unvaccinated is at lower risk for all the other things? That's the question, right? Like, it's
mm,
not about the diseases. Like, they're more at risk for measles, right? Like that's just a reality. But the question is are they at lower risk of all the other things? And some research says yes, and some says no. But the research really officially hasn't been done. We've never studied it appropriately.
Guys, I don't normally drop ads in my show, but this is worth your attention. If you're serious about leveling up, the truth is most men don't succeed because they try to do everything alone. They lack brothers, they lack the push, the accountability that forges real strength, like steel against steel. You get stronger when you're forged alongside the right men. That's exactly what the Dude Tribe is, an online brotherhood for men ready to grow. Here, you won't just join a community, you'll become one of the wolves in the pack. You'll train, push, and rise with the tribe. We're opening applications for the Manhood Mastery Program, a 1 year journey of real transformation. You'll gain social confidence that turns head, confidence in your body, a crystal clear mission in life, boosted masculinity and testosterone, and honestly, you'll become the happiest dude you know. Seats are limited, and we're going through applications to make sure the right men join. If you're ready to see if you fit the crew, go to freedude.co, join the community, and start the application process. Don't wait, build your tribe, level up, and start living life on your terms. Mm. So you mentioned measles, and just in, like, if I just, like, speak about Sweden, but I don't know about the States or the UK, that, like, if a person is around maybe like 50, 55, when they were younger, they used to have measles parties,
Hmm.
where if somebody has measles, you got together so all of the other kids could get measles. And it's the same with chickenpox. But now we have a vaccine for measles, and we also have a vaccine for chickenpox. What do you think about that?
Yeah,
Is
I would.
measles that dangerous that you need to get vaccinated for it?
So it's not that dangerous on an individual level. So I think with something like measles, there's been a very large push to kind of instill fear about a disease which generally is quite mild. So and that's
Mm.
where I think it's nuanced, because I think you need to have the appropriate conversations when it comes to something like measles. You could go back before the vaccine. Millions of people got measles and only a few hundred died, right? We don't want anybody to die, but in the scale of like of a disease, that's actually really low. If you consider just even today, tens of thousands of people die from the flu, and we're not necessarily all running around super afraid of the flu, right? So you're talking
Yeah.
about 300 kids and millions of people, not a very deadly disease. Most kids get a cold and they're totally fine. And like you said, it's not something that most people were worried about back then, but some people do get really sick. You certainly can die from it. You certainly have a reasonable risk of pneumonia, going to the hospital, complications. So it's not at a zero risk. And I think for something like measles, because it's so contagious, the concern is more on a public health level than individual level, because if something's super duper contagious, then everybody gets it. And then even though most kids do fine, some kids don't. And you get a few hundred deaths, you get thousands of pneumonia cases, you get other sorts of complications. So there is a burden there to the children, to to society, to school, to sickness, hospitals, all those things. So you're weighing those things, right? At a personal level, you don't need to be terrified of it, but I
Mm.
think at a societal level, the vaccine still has benefits in terms of decreasing all of those issues. Again, it comes back to, okay, that's true, but at what cost? That's the question, right? At what cost? If it doesn't have any sort of negative effect on you, then of course that's a good thing. You don't have to get sick. Great. The few kids don't die. Great. Like, I mean, we want to protect everybody. But the question is, how many kids die of the measles vaccine? How many kids have a severe
Mm.
complication of the measles vaccine? That's the question. And if it's zero, then yeah, you should get it. If it's more, then actually the problems with measles, then maybe not, or maybe that means you have to change the vaccine and make it safer. Like that. Those are the equations and the
Mm.
questions that are supposed to be asked, because it's not anti-vaccine to say, well, if the vaccine's causing more problems than the disease, is that a good vaccine? Right? Like,
Mm. Yeah.
question. And I don't know the answer unless you actually study it like that.
Yeah, and I love that you are bringing like nuance to the conversation, because like most of my time spending on trying to figure out what is what is has been either like you're fully on or you're fully anti-vaccine. So I really appreciate like the nuances that you're bringing here.
Well, yeah,
And when we are,
can I say on that, like,
yeah,
that was also one of the big drivers for me writing the book, right? It's like people would always ask, okay, what should I read? Where should I go? What should I do? And my
yeah,
only answer, and my answer is, you have to read more than one thing. Like, when it
mm,
comes to vaccine literature or anything online, it's like very polarized. You have your like CDC style, like, vaccines are the
yeah,
best ever. They never cause a problem. They never has an issue. And then you have somebody else who writes a book and it's like, vaccines are the worst thing ever. Never take a vaccine. They causing all these. And you're
mm,
like what? Like, these are so uh, they're so separate.
mm,
And even when I tried to go through, like, for example, like asthma, allergies, and the research, and you read like something by Paul Offit, one of the big pro-vaccine individuals, and his books are great. I mean, they're really interesting and very well written. But you read a section on that, it's like, oh, vaccines don't cause allergies. There's no research that shows that. And then you're like, but there is actually lots of good data that shows that it might. Like, you have to show both. You can't just say it doesn't. Like, it's just it's not appropriately presented. There are two sides of the story here.
yeah, definitely. And that has been the case when I've watched documentaries or reading articles or even like reading books, trying to see both sides. It's like it's really black and white. And I want to ask you about the Amish. So often, often you bring up the Amish that doesn't vaccinate their what do you call it, their population or
Mhm.
their group. What has been your thoughts about it? What have you found out? Have you studied them or taken them to your research or in your book?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit. I've looked into it a little bit. Um, they always come up. So the things that are not true is that Amish never vaccinate. That's not true. Some of them
That's
do.
not true. All
Yeah,
right. Mm.
most of them don't. So most Amish don't vaccinate, but some certainly do. It's also not true that Amish don't have autism. They do, but it seems like it's not at the rate even close to what's in the general population. So a lot of the research on Amish comes into account with its like a chronic disease and autism, which it seems like their rates are much lower. I mean,
Mm.
there is some argument to be made that maybe they don't go to the doctor as much, or maybe they don't get evaluated like kids in the general population. So that might be some factor. But there is certainly some research where people have gone in, done independent evaluation, and it seems like the rates are much lower. So I think that. The answer so far with Amish is we don't quite know, but that would seem like a very logical place that we should be studying a lot more. Like,
Mm.
we've done really good studies on it comparing Amish kids versus not. I would guess likely they have lower rates of a lot of chronic illnesses, but they also do a lot of things differently, right? So it would be
Yeah, it's not only the vaccines.
right, like, it would be like, with something like the Amish, it would be impossible to be like, "Oh, yeah, because they don't have as many vaccines, they don't have as much chronic disease." Like, well, yeah, they do everything, differently. So I think that has to be factored in too, but that is still super important. Like, again, you can't pinpoint on vaccines, but you could say, well, look, in the Amish, they have 1/10 the rate of asthma and allergies and autoimmune conditions and autism. Okay, why? Like, that's what we need to know. It's not about whether it's vaccines or not. It's about what things are they doing differently? What can we learn
Mm.
from them? And that is the way that we should be approaching this. The same thing when you talk about an unvaccinated child. If it does pan out over time that we do the right research and an unvaccinated child has a lower risk of all these chronic conditions, the question is now why? It's not, is it just vaccines? It's what are all the things that they're doing differently and what can we learn
Mm.
to teach the general population so that they can have those lower rates of chronic disease too? That's what we should
Yeah,
be from this research.
yeah. And was there anything else that was particularly interesting while like reading upon the Amish that they do differently? What else are they doing differently?
No, I mean, I think the big things are their lifestyle, their eating. So they eat mostly fresh food that they grow themselves. They're always exercising and moving. I mean, they don't like, so I go to the gym, but they're like always moving and farming and
Mm.
plowing. They live a different lifestyle. They're much more community oriented. They do a lot more together. So I think
Mm.
they kind of, if you were generalizing it, kind of live more in the old way of living.
Yeah.
And they kind of go back in time and they do things more naturally and local, which I think in general is going to keep you healthier from chronic disease, but you still have more risk of infectious disease. And that was what we saw, 100 years ago. You have a much higher risk of infectious disease. You die from more of those, but not as much chronic disease.
Yeah, and this gets us into a great segue here from one of your signs. I think you said something about like that good health is built in the kitchen and gardens, not pharmacies. So if you could like redesign pediatric care from scratch, how would that belief shape the way we raise and treat our kids?
I what we've failed at, like, very miserably in America over the last 50 to 100 years is we've corporatized everything and mass produced everything, and we've traded health for cheaper and easier, and that's a big mistake. I think for long-term health, I think that we've allowed corporations to get so big to create mass production of certain products to try to make things cheaper and more accessible for everybody. And it's good that we have more food, but it's crappy food. And
Mm.
and, and we've continued down this path. And the reality, if you step back, it's just basic common sense. Like, we're built of what we eat. If you're eating crappy food, you're not going to be healthy. You don't have the right nutrients in your body to function appropriately for your immune system to work well, for you to grow as optimally. And that's where we are. Most of our food is mass produced. It's shipped in from somewhere else. It doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it. It's not fresh. And you lose a lot when you do that. And anybody, I mean, we've mostly all been to like a farm or something, and like you take a bite of an apple off a tree or a berry. You're like, that's a totally different product than you get in the store, even the best case scenario. And we've lost that. We don't have that, and we have to get that back. So I think if we want to improve our rates of chronic disease in the future, we're going to have to figure out a way to find some middle ground and decrease our reliance on mass production. And that's not something that's going to happen in the short. Like, we can't just all of a sudden start growing everybody food locally. That's not going to work. But we could start to push backwards a little bit on that and start to build the infrastructure so that there's more local farms and produce available. Which technology now is amazing, and there are a lot. You can make a farm in a parking lot. Like, there's a lot more that
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, so it is possible. You can make things on roofs, and I think we have to start transitioning the food system, especially back to more localized and having that available for everybody. So there's more fresh food. At least if that's 25% of what you're eating, whatever it is, we start to shift the balance, start to subsidize farms that are doing good work, smaller farms, local farms.
Mm.
I think that's all possible. We can have both. It's not mass production, but just not as much of
Mhm.
it, and then start to shape our cities around movement again and our lives around movement. I think those are things
Mm.
that could be done if we prioritize it.
Yeah, totally agree. Upon making or growing food at a parking lot, have you met the gangster gardener?
Mhm.
I think
I've
he's in
never I know
LA.
who he is. Yeah, yeah, I've never met him, but I know who he is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen him doing like amazing things. I took his masterclass on masterclass.com and started like growing things in like, yeah, old bags and stuff like that, sweet potatoes and stuff. It's really fascinating what you can do with that. And I want to share a story when I went to the local doctor here in Sweden, and I wanted to see if I was gluten intolerant. I knew I shouldn't be eating gluten, but it just like when I ate bread, I started to snore at night, and I had some hard time breathing. I just went, did the test, and the test came back, and it was a female doctor. She said, "You're not gluten intolerant." And then she leaned in and whispered to me, "But no human being should be eating gluten." So I took that as I'm not supposed to tell you this, and you shouldn't tell anybody that I told you this. So, how is your practice? Can you speak about food and if somebody has an ailment where you know there's another way that hasn't that where you can heal without drugs that you prescribe that, or do you inform them of you can start eating carrots or you can just go out into the sun? Is that illegal in the States or in your practice?
I mean, anything's legal. You can do whatever you want. You can get sued if you're wrong. But you can tell anybody anything that you wanna tell them in terms of a treatment plan if you're their doctor. Um, again, I'm not against medicine. I think there's a time and a place for medications. I think in terms of emergency care, we've come a very long way. In terms of saving your life with the medication, you come a very long way. People die all the time from pneumonia, and we're very lucky we have antibiotics that can cure you in those situations. But that's not the majority of the time. Most of the time, you should not be using a medication, and there are all sorts of other things that you can do. And I think that's the way that medicine should be practiced is the most minimal that you can do in terms of medication. And if you need a medication, that should be last resort. But sometimes you need it, and that's okay. And that's what we do. It shouldn't be a secret to discuss things like gluten or dairy. I think
Hmm.
that I don't even think I know that there are just so many people that are sensitive to them. It doesn't mean that you're allergic to it. A lot of people are not necessarily allergic to them. Those are very different symptoms. There certainly are some, but most people just don't tolerate it well. They just don't drink. They maybe drink milk and they don't have the enzymes to break it down, or they just don't doesn't work well with their body. Same thing with gluten. It's certainly, and I think it's more to do with the way that we do things today than it is necessarily about the gluten or the dairy. I think we don't
How do you mean?
dairy, for example, like we pump it full of hormones and antibiotics, mass production. So it's not like the natural. You're just getting it straight from a cow. Gluten, it's very different if it's filled with a bunch of chemicals and ingredients and mass produced versus somebody in, Italy or Paris like baking
Yeah.
bread in their house all day. It takes hours to make it. You're making a nice sourdough that's fermented. I mean, I think that's just a different product than what we're
Mm.
getting. So I think that that's why a lot of people have sensitivity to just the mass produced kind of burger versus just having the best kind of bread. Some people are totally sensitive to it and can't have it, but I think in terms of like celiacs, that's not a huge percent. Maybe
Yeah.
1% less than that. But sensitive, I think most people are. But then a lot of people that are sensitive eat really well made bread and they do okay.
Mm.
So I think it's something that you can probably handle minimally, but probably most people can't eat a ton of. But certainly the mass produced stuff they can't.
Mm.
So yeah, that's what that I approach it. I think that for kids, especially or adults, the number one thing and this isn't me speaking, this is like every integrative practitioner, you changing up your diet helps more people than anything else. I think if you're eating crappy food and eating ultra processed food, which most people are, like 70% of most people's diets is ultra processed
Mm.
food. At this point, you change that one thing, and that's going to benefit your health in many ways. It's not necessarily going to get rid of your autoimmune condition, but it might improve it a lot, or it might put you on a better path to being able to let your body heal. So I think it's extremely important to think in that way. Doesn't mean if you have a pneumonia you should just eat a carrot, but eating a carrot will help you overall to maybe get fewer pneumonias.
You're preaching to the choir here, brother. So, could you share a couple of examples where you don't prescribe drugs and you prescribe something that is some sort of a natural remedy.
Yeah, well, I'd say the biggest thing for kids is just viruses like colds and coughs and
Mm,
congestion because kids are getting sick all the time. They're getting sick on average 3 to 5 times a year, maybe a little more at this point, and most of them are just basic colds. Antibiotics, it doesn't do anything. If anything, it's a net negative, right? You're giving a kid a medication that does nothing from a benefit and certainly has some risks and affects your gut. So there are and this is not like again, this is one of those things that's like super not woo woo. Like there are lots of things out there that have been studied a ton that show some benefit. It's not magic, but it does have hard, great science that shows that there's a minimal benefit. So vitamin C, vitamin D, elderberry, zinc, honey, colloidal silver, all these things have great, there are many more but that have great research over many decades that shows that you have a small benefit, a decreased risk,
mm,
infection in general. And we're not talking like 20 days versus 1 day. It's like, oh, 4.5 days versus 4.3 days. But like, okay, it's a little benefit, a little bit of immune support.
mm,
All those things are good. And at least you can do that instead of taking a medication that makes things worse. Um,
mm.
yeah. So I think there are things you can do.
So could we take pneumonia as an example for a young kid that's 7 years old? How would you go about treating that child?
Yeah, well, I think if you have a pneumonia that's treatable, like let's say you have walking pneumonia, I mean, you would take your antibiotic. That's going to make a difference. You wouldn't want that kid to be sick or get sicker, but you could also add on those supplements too to help with the immune system. So I think it's kind of both, right? Like you can do
All
that.
right.
And then after the fact, if you're taking a lot of antibiotics, like maybe think about a probiotic. So that way it helps to repopulate the gut.
Mm,
But it's again, it's both. Like, do you want to not give your kid a treatment for walking pneumonia? No, you do. Like people die from that all the time. So
mm,
we do have an easy treatment, and then the net benefit there is massive compared to your risk from the
mm,
antibiotic. So again, I don't think we should shun modern medicine. Like people used to live till they were 40, right? So there's a lot of things that we do better
mm,
for modern medicine, but just we don't need to give an antibiotic for every ear pain
mm,
or every cold or every sore throat or every cough. Like that is what's going on right now.
mm.
That is a bad path forward. We have kids taking too many antibiotics.
Yeah, and I would like to for you to expand a little bit about on antibiotics. In what other cases do you think antibiotics is a really good idea?
Well, usually so you're trying to figure out if it's a bacterial infection. I think that's the first key, right? Most things that kids get are viruses. Antibiotics don't help. For a bacterial infection, they do. So as things are getting more severe, as things are going on, and you have more significant symptoms, I mean, I think that's really where it's going to be most beneficial. So serious trouble breathing, high fevers for many days, lethargic, not being able to like those kinds of things. I mean, obviously, if you have like a meningitis from bacteria, you'd want to treat it. If you have a pneumonia, you'd want to treat it if it's bacterial. Strep throat is another one. There are severe complications that are frequent enough from strep throat that that's a reasonable thing to treat. An ear infection, a bad one, that's something that's reasonable to treat. So not just you have a little ear pain, but it's been a couple days, you're miserable.
Mm,
A bacterial infection. I mean, it's going to need an antibiotic to get better. But that again, it's like 1% of the time. It's not most of the time. It's just
mm.
it's more rare. So there are occasions when it's reasonable, but not just because your kid has like a sniffle.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just like going through the times we really needed to give the kids like antibiotics. Like it's really our last resort, and I don't know why, but me and my wife we feel a little bit like not broken, but a little bit like, oh fuck, we need to give them antibiotics. But then, as you said, we try to give them like some probiotics and just like boost their immune system naturally. But I'm super happy that we have those because I think those like have really helped us and saved our kids' lives actually. So happy you took that up. And I've seen in your content also that you've compared screens to the new junk food, and love for you to dive into this. So, what's the real neurological or developmental cost we're paying by letting kids grow up indoors and online? And I need to give a huge shout out to the Swedish government who just banned all all smartphones from school. So it's forbidden now.
Yeah,
From
I think
just, I
that's
think it
great.
just was just this last week I heard that.
Yeah, I heard that too, and that's great. And Yeah, I don't think that we have an appreciation of just how bad these are for our health. I think we're just starting to. I think we've kind of moved past the like we have no knowledge of this to I think we're starting to identify that it is an issue, and we are starting to see a lot of changes happening. I mean, just like you mentioned, there are European countries that are really moving against this. There are certainly some states and some schools and some school districts in America that have moved to ban phones from schools, and I think that's a good thing.
Mm,
Um, I think that what we're seeing right now is increasing screen times, like way beyond reasonable. I'm not like anti-screen or anti-technology or think that there's all the boogeyman or you like watch a movie and that's the world. Like, we all grew up watching some TV and movies, and that's not the problem. The problem is when we're seeing kids that are on average on screen 7 to 9 hours a day. Now, that is way
Wow.
too much. That's the
Shit.
numbers, right? I mean, I don't know about what it is there.
Wait,
It's probably
7 to 8 hours for real?
yeah, 7 to 9 hours is the average amount that teens are on screens in America now.
Wow.
So that's absurd. And the very basic of it is if you're on 7 to 9 hours of screens, then what are you not doing, right? You're not
mm,
outside, you're not in community, you're not talking to people, you're not moving. So just based on that alone, that's the first big problem. Not to mention just passively taking things and then the effects on your mental health, which are also disastrous. And we know that now. I mean, we know, and that's why so many schools are banning it, that it's really bad for your mental health. It's really hard to concentrate in school. You're not going to do as well. You're going to be stressed out. You're always seeing things. You're not paying attention. Like, how do you pay attention to some boring topic in school if you can just scroll on
mm,
your phone? Like, it's hard enough to pay attention all day in school, but if you can just like, you know, go on your phone and look at it, and then you're like, oh, this thing got bombed in this country. Oh, there's this horrible disease here. Like, how are you paying attention to your math homework if you're doing that? Like, you're just not. So I think it's not unreasonable that you shouldn't have those in school. You want to have like an emergency phone in your bag or whatever. Fine, that doesn't bother me. But you shouldn't be on screens. Kids don't need that. They don't need that stress. Adults have enough trouble with it in terms of the stress and the mental health. So there's no chance that teens are going to do okay with that at that age. They're not equipped or prepared
mm,
for it, and there's no need. There's no need for it at that age. So I think that we are seeing a pushback, and it's good. I think, well, I know, that most kids don't even want it. They just feel like they need it because all their other friends are on it. So I think if we can have a societal kind of reckoning and change to kind of push back and say like, no, no, kids are not going to be on these till they're older. It's not going to be the norm. It's not going to be cool to have a phone when you're 10. You don't need that. Then I think that we can kind of move back to a little bit better place where you can have maybe access to a phone without internet for emergencies. That's fine. And then the rest of it, you can have your,
mm,
social media when you're older if that's what you choose, and you can, wreck your mental health when you're an adult if you want to.
mhm.
Yeah, that's exactly like what you said in the end there. Wreck your mental health, because like we see so many adults. Like I didn't grow up with smartphones. It was just like came when I think I was maybe 23 when the first iPhone came out. So I grew up without it, but I've felt like how much it just like sucks the energy out of me. So I need to be like really cautious with how I use it and putting it in the hands of kids. Do you have any like guidelines for parents who are thinking about giving their kid a phone? Should it be not a smartphone, or do you have like a age limit for when they get a smartphone, and why should they even get a smartphone?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, ideally, try to push the smartphone back as far as possible. Um, you know, 14, 16, 18, like whatever you can do to push it back, I think to do that. If your kid must have social media, then you can always, get them set up and have it on a computer or something so they can check it, every now and again, but they just can't check it all the time. Ideally, they don't have it, but I think it's hard when everybody else has it. I mean, hopefully we're going to move away from it, but I think kids feel left out. So you don't need to be checking on your phone every single day. You could check it once a day or something like that, on a computer, and that would still keep you connected, but just not as stressed out. So I think that's like maybe a reasonable middle ground. And I do think that a lot of parents worry about their kids and obviously and like where they are and want them to be able to connect with them. So luckily there is this movement away from smartphones, and there's a lot of options available now.
Mm,
You can kind of go back in time to just the original kind of phones, and you can make a phone call, but you don't have internet access. And I think that's a very reasonable compromise for right now. And I think that we shouldn't necessarily also shun technology. Like, it is good. I think if your kid, especially as they get older, if there's an emergency, they have access to call you. That's not a bad idea. So I think that's fine. And if you get your kid a phone that has no internet, that works for me. And I think that's a happy middle zone between safety and reasonableness. And if your kid really wants social media, then as they get older, do it that way, and just try to push it back as much as you can. And I think parents just have to do it. It's the same thing as food. It's like you have to be that parent right now that says, like, no, we're not going to eat that food at home. We're not going to buy all that junk food. It's not good for you. Like, I care about you, so I know that your friends eat all this stuff, but we're just not going to buy it anymore. And it's the same thing with a phone. I think
Mm,
have to be like, look, I know some of your friends have a smartphone. You're not getting one. Like, you can have one without internet. You can have a smartphone when you're an adult. You can do what you want, but we're just not buying it for you. My kids are not that old yet, but that's what I would do. I mean, I'll get my kid a phone. Even after 10 or 12, that's like not a smartphone, but not no smartphone for a long time.
mm.
Hey, real quick, if you're listening to this, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I know, like, it's just a button, but it actually helps us keep this thing alive. You're not just clicking a button, you're joining the crew, a brotherhood. You're helping other dudes figure out how to design their lives, level up, and stop wandering around like lost dogs. So go ahead, please hit subscribe. Be part of this little movement we got going, and I promised it won't be boring.
Yeah, totally agree with you. So my son has stopped asking me for a phone because I always have the same answer. Like, when you move out of the house, you can do whatever you want, but we're not getting a phone for
Yeah.
you. So and he's fine with that. And I wanted to. You mentioned food there. What guidelines do you have for healthy eating? This is another, like,
Yeah.
it's like it's like the vaccine question. You're either carnivore or you're a vegan, or you're like, there's like so much dogma around different ideas of how to eat. Do you
Yeah.
have like any ideas? How do you do you have any guidelines for your clients?
Yeah, I try to keep it simple. I think when it comes to nutrition, if you want to really dive into it, there's a lot you can dive into, but for most people, it's just way too much. And I think we've way overcomplicated food, and it's not that complicated. Like, you eat real food. That's what you do. You need to buy real food. You need to prepare it yourself as much as you can. Make as many meals as you can at home, and the ingredients should be actual things as opposed to something that's already pre-made. And I think if you do that most of the time, you're going to get very far. Read ingredient labels. Try to buy things where you only know what the ingredients are. The more minimal the ingredients in general, the better. Try to buy fresh food. Try to buy local food. Try to cook more. I think if people do that and go in that direction,
Mm,
then whatever they're cooking, whatever they're doing, whatever diets they have, they're going to do better. Try to minimize the sugar, minimize the chemicals and additives, and whether you're vegan, vegetarian, carnivore. I mean, I think you're probably, as a human, best on kind of doing both. We probably eat way too much meat in general, and fish and other things. I think we need to, like, you don't need so much of it, but I think most people do well with some of it. We probably eat too much of it, but try to get the best quality that you can. And then, try to increase your veggies and your fruits, which most people don't eat enough of. And most of the research shows that, in terms of, if we're looking at the long-term benefits, like cardiovascular disease, we know you need to eat your fruits, you need to eat your vegetables, you minimize your sugar, beans and lentils, some protein, good quality protein. You kind of mix that together, good quality fats, and if you do that and you kind of balance it, overall you're going to be fine, and you're going to be much farther along than anything else. And seed oils, not seed oils, olive oil, this, that. I mean, all these things at the end of the day are less important, I think, than just eating actual, real, healthy, quality food, and all research shows that. And you can get into the weeds of this versus that, but ultimately, eating real food is what's going to matter as a net positive, and whatever you can afford, the best quality real food is going to get you much farther.
And can you share a story where you've like supported the family to go from mostly processed food into like more real food,
Yeah,
and
we talk about.
what happened to them?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about it all the time. I would say, more recently, people that come to my practice are more health conscious, so they're already eating healthier food. But
Okay.
certainly, I mean, it's not always, but before, for sure. I mean, all the time, it was switching families over and talking about it, and it was maybe the first time they really thought about it. And all these kids with chronic conditions, you see them improve drastically, like obesity, autoimmune conditions, diabetes, or blood sugar issues. You just see their rashes get better, their symptoms improve, the amount of times they're getting sick decrease. Very clear signals from just improving their food, which is common sense. I mean, you eat better, you're going to be healthier, your body's more in balance, you're not dealing with all the inflammation from dealing with all the sugar and the chemicals, and so your body's able to rebalance a little bit more, and you see that. And it's so interesting because as a concept, we totally understand it with diabetes, and we always have, like, type 2 diabetes. What was the recommendations always, even in modern medicine? Okay, clean up your diet, eat healthier, exercise more, you can see your diabetes go away. And that was, it's just specific to that, but it's not. It's true of all the conditions. Like that's how our body works, and we just see it with diabetes maybe more clearly. But those are the recommendations you should be really giving for all conditions. And
Mm.
it's not necessarily magical, like, oh, you're going to cure your cystic fibrosis if you eat better, but you're probably
Mm.
going to have less illnesses if you do. So it's good advice for everybody, I think, in general, or most people.
Yeah. And so if we would like spin on this topic, what would be some of the like must have healthy foundations to
Yeah.
have like a healthy life, healthy body, healthy mind? So we
I,
mentioned food here.
Yeah, I call it the seeds of health. It's kind of my mnemonic. Everyone has a different mnemonic, but for me, it's stress, environment, and toxins, exercise, diet, and sleep. I think those are kind of the big foundational tools. I mean, sunlight's really important in community, but I think that kind of a little bit of goes under stress. So I think those are the big things. Like, you got to move, you got to eat healthy, you got to make sure that you sleep. We have to think about those toxins that we're exposed to, and we have to minimize our stress and be just happy in general.
Yeah. And where do you find these toxins? Like what am I being
Everything, everywhere.
yeah. So let's like just share like a couple of points
Yeah,
like
I would say, I mean,
what I need to look out for.
the big, I mean, the number one big category is in food, right? You have to think about the chemicals and toxins that are sprayed on
Right.
everything, that are inside of our food. So that's I say the biggest one. But then the other one is like all the things we put on our body. So the sprays and the lotions and the sunscreens and the makeup, all those things are all full of chemicals. So you try to buy the naturalist ones that you possibly can with minimal ingredients. And then everything else. So what we're surrounded in, like, what are we cleaning our house with? What kind of products are we buying for our house? What is our clothes made of? What's sprayed on our sheets, and what cleaners are we using for our floor and in our in our laundry. Like, all of these things add up, and so if you can get more natural things, then sometimes that can be a net benefit to just decrease your burden, because no matter what you do, we're all exposed to all sorts of chemicals. I mean, we're breathing them in, we're drinking them, they're on our food, so you can only do so much. But I think if you can at least decrease the burden somewhat, then that gets you a little bit better, a little bit less of a load for your body, and hopefully that your body can handle it.
So do you use a water filter, shower filter, air filter?
Yeah, we have those, and we have air filters in our house. We have water filters. Mostly we get glass bottled water, so that's mostly what we drink. LA
Mm.
water is not very good, so
Yeah.
you shouldn't drink it either way. But you can. I would at least filter it. If you're drinking tap water in general, unless you like live in Vienna or something, you should probably filter it. Most places don't have the best tap water. Some places in Europe have pretty good tap water, but I think that having a filter for chemicals is probably reasonable for most people. And these are the kind of things where your bang for your buck is massive. Yes, it costs some money, but filtering your water makes a lot of sense. Having an air filter around for bad air days makes a lot of sense. Like, you can't change all the air, but you can make it a little better in your house when you have a fire, or some smog or whatever. So I think those things are really worthwhile when talking about what you can spend your money on. That's a good bang for your buck.
Great, agree. So I have a real question from the community. So I
Sure.
shared that you were coming on the podcast, and we have. I'm not going to mention names because the situation here in Sweden, and if someone says they have unvaccinated kids, it can get them in trouble. So no mentioning names here. But here's the question. So, say I've got unvaccinated kids and we want to travel to Bali or Egypt, two countries where you got higher rates of things like dengue, typhoid, hepatitis A, maybe malaria, depending on the region. How would you consult a family like that? What's your personal protocol? Is it about supplements, immunity prevention, or would you actually advise against going?
Well, to me, I mean, first of all, for travel, in general, I mean, obviously I have some conversations, but travel doctors tend to be the ones that focus on these things because you have to be very specific to where you're going. And I think that ultimately you have to understand what your risk is. And if someone was to come to me and say, "Oh, I'm traveling to Bali or whatever," I don't necessarily know what the risks are there. It changes all the time, and certainly it's different in terms of what's available, what your higher risk factors are. So that's where I think a travel doctor is really very useful because they would be educated on each region and kind of have knowledge of looking things up and understand some of those other vaccines that we don't usually use on a daily basis, and nor do a regular medical office carry a lot of those other vaccines. But I don't think the concept is different. I think the concept of whether you should or shouldn't comes down to risks versus benefits. And I think you need to understand what your risks are, where you're going somewhere. And you have to be able to understand if you don't give something, what is the risk to your child or to yourself? And, like malaria is a perfect example. Like, if you're going to Africa, do you need, to take it? Not necessarily, but what's your risk? How likely are you to get it? And what happens if you get it? And a lot of people do choose to do it if the risk is high enough. So you have to just understand that and then make those choices. If we're talking about some of like the regular diseases, like let's say measles or polio or hepatitis A, like those risks exist wherever you are, and they certainly increase whenever you're going to go to an airport, whenever you're going to travel, and of course if you go somewhere where there's more polio, then it increases your risk to get it. So you need to know that to make a decision, and ultimately you can decide, I don't want those risks and I'm going to go and I'm going to risk getting polio, but then ultimately you might get it. So you have to just decide if you're okay with that. And I don't think that really changes for whether you're going to school in Sweden or whether you're going to Bali. I mean, the risks are whatever they are wherever you are, and you have to decide if you're comfortable with those.
And are there many diseases that have a mortal outcome
Most of the
that,
disease.
that you can't treat? So, if, for example, if we were going to Bali, the kids get dengue, is it not treatable?
Most diseases, all the diseases basically are treatable usually,
Yeah.
right? But not everybody, right? You can die of the flu, you could die of malaria, you could die of measles. I mean, these things are all possible. They have different rates of serious complications, but most people don't. But also, you can get really sick. I mean, not dying is not the only bad thing. There are lots of other things that can put you in the hospital, in the ICU. You can get really sick and then come back from it. So you have to weigh kind of all those things, I think. But yeah, I mean, most things you're not going to die from, because if a disease just killed everybody, then it wouldn't be around, right? So most diseases don't kill you; they just make you sick, and sick enough for you to pass it on, but not sick enough to die. So death is not really the only measure of some of these diseases, but generally, you can still get pretty sick from some of them.
Yeah. Do you have a perspective of that some diseases might like increase and strengthen their immune system, and because it feels like, especially in Sweden, that we are trying to prevent our kids from getting any form of diseases and illnesses?
Is
Like
is
we are
your
afraid of
question
like
like?
just letting them have a fever, which
Yeah,
will
yeah,
like
yeah.
oftentimes just like run through their body and they'll get out of it. So they're just like pumping them with painkillers in order for them to be more convenient or don't feel like the discomfort.
Yeah, I think there's two different questions there. I
All
think
right.
that, question one is kind of convenience, right? So we're talking about
Yeah.
the medications you kind of mentioned at the end, like Tylenol or fever support, whatever it is. I I
Mm.
I, I think that for sure we're using way too many medications, and that convenience or kind of just minimizing the symptoms has a negative effect overall. A lot of times I think that you need to weigh how serious something is. Doesn't mean you should never take a medication, but I think just because your kid has a little fever or some mild symptoms, we need to be very mindful not to just give a medication, because for a fever, for example, your body's doing something, right? Your body is raising the temperature to fight off the infection, to help move the blood cells around your body and make it inhospitable for the disease. So I think your body's doing something, and by taking a medicine, you're actually preventing your body from doing what it wants to do. And most research does show that if you're taking medications, it increases the length of some of these diseases by a little bit. So I think that is something to be mindful of. Doesn't mean you never take a medication, but I think you just should only use it when you really need to. So I think that's part one. Um, Part two is a more intelligent question, I think, with a more difficult answer, because it would involve kind of really thinking that through and researching it, and having, I think, debates on whether there's some net positive to getting some of these diseases for your immune system long term? I think that's the right question because, again, it comes back to, well, what are the kind of long term complications or benefits of getting a disease? And there is a lot of research, and there is certainly discussions around some positives from exposing yourself to some of these diseases, to getting full immunity from them, how that might affect your immune system. So I think that's a reasonable question, but you have to also weigh that against not dying from the disease, right? And the theoretical reason for getting a vaccine is you are exposing yourself before you get this serious infection to protect you from that serious infection, from dying or getting serious complications. So while there might be a net positive for those that survive and don't die, you still have some people that die. So we're weighing those two things, and I think that we don't give enough weight to necessarily the net benefit of a disease because we're so worried about the net negative of getting sick or having a kid being sick when ultimately, I don't like, you have to think of things in the way that things are. You can't have rose colored glasses. You can't be so rosy when you're like, oh, I just don't want ever a kid to die. Like that's not the way that things work. People die, people get really sick. I don't want anybody to die either. But if, I don't know, 100 kids die from whooping cough, but 1,000 kids are saved because everybody gets whooping cough and it decreases your overall risk. Like, which one is better, right? Like, you have to look at it that way, and it's not so easy when you're like, well, okay. Or easier example, whooping cough vaccine saves 100 lives, but whooping cough vaccine kills 10,000 people, right? Like, you have to be able to ask that question and say, does it kill more people than it prevents, right? I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying, if it did, should you be giving a vaccine that hurts more people than it helps? Yes, you can prevent disease, but you're also creating more problems, right? So that is the nuance that is required in a discussion because everything has a positive and a negative, and the decision to give your kid a medical product should be about the weight of the risks versus benefits, and you don't want to give someone a medication if it causes more likely harm, right? And if you can't talk about that, then you can't make things better. And right now we have not been able to talk about that, and so we have vaccines are the best thing ever, and we don't have any push to make them better. It's just a push to do more, and that's wrong. Like, we want the best vaccines possible with the least risks.
Yeah. And you've been like looking at both sides, both like for the pro-vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers. What are some of the beliefs or arguments on both sides that you feel are completely wrong or just misinterpreted?
Well, I think, we talked a little bit about how like unvaccinated kids are so unhealthy, which I think is untrue. I think that they're at least, that they're not as unhealthy as people are made to believe, or like pariahs out there. I think most people that know unvaccinated kids they're healthier in general. So I think that's one weird thing that we've been kind of taught. Everything around autism is very surprising to me. I think that as someone who's gone through the mainstream medicine, you were told, oh, it's been debunked. Vaccines have nothing to do with autism. We know the science is settled. And when you look at the science, it's definitely not settled. Most of the research is around MMR and thimerosal, the mercury component. We've never really studied all vaccines for autism. So the answer is we don't know. Same thing for just really every chronic condition. We just don't know. We've never studied vaccinated and unvaccinated kids. We've never followed them forward. So we just don't have a good sense of what that is. We have some retrospective studies and some epidemiologic studies, but generally not vaccinated versus unvaccinated anyways. And so we don't have the best kind of research that we need to really answer the questions honestly. And the honest answer should be we don't know, as opposed to it's safe. That's not the answer based on the research that we have.
Yeah. Do you think like most people and especially doctors are not comfortable with saying that I don't know?
Well, I don't think they know that they don't know. Right? I didn't know that I didn't
That's
know.
another issue.
Yeah, I think we're taught this over and over again that there's so much research. It's been debunked. There's so much science. Here are the studies, and then no one actually looks at those studies. And when you look at it, like, I'm 100% confident that if doctors actually knew what the research on autism was, they would never say it's been settled.
Okay.
People don't know. They're told over and over again that it is, so you just assume that it is. Why would you think that you're being told something that's not true? The autism research is literally built around the fact that we've never identified very clearly that vaccines cause autism, so therefore it doesn't cause autism. And you can't say that when you haven't studied it. This is basically we haven't studied it so that it doesn't, right? That is not how it works. The answer is we haven't studied it, so we don't know. But because the research that we have hasn't shown it, because they really haven't looked at it appropriately or in the best possible way, then we still have this, oh, it's been debunked, it's been settled. But you don't see any vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies to actually say that. And I think most people would think that we've done it a lot, and we studied a lot when it hasn't actually happened. And that's what I thought.
Mm. Yeah, I got you. I think it was 9 years ago, I saw a documentary series called Vaccines Revealed, and where RFK was one of the speakers in one of the episodes. Haven't heard about him before then, and not after until he got into the White House. What are uh, your thoughts about what he is bringing to the White House?
I I think that he is the response to COVID. I think that people are so frustrated with everything that they want a little bit more openness and they want change and they're angry with health in general. And I think that he brings a differing opinion, a dissenting voice. He brings an interest in change. And so I think that overall it's a good thing that we have change happening. We have a very sick population and the world is moving in the wrong direction. I think that not everything he says I agree with, not everything that anybody says everyone should agree with. I think that's totally fine. But ultimately, we do need change, and he is pushing change and has done a lot in a short time. Some of it good, not all of it, I think.
Mm.
There's a lot to do. And it's very
Mm.
hard. He's one person and he's dealing in a major system. And I think he's done a lot of, he's brought a lot of awareness around health like no one's ever done before. And we've seen change on a scale in health that we've never seen before. And I think that's all good. In general, I think we need that. And ultimately, some of the things are not going to turn out to be the best, but that's fine. Like we need a net positive and a big change. And I think
Mm.
he's doing the best that he can, and he's doing what he thinks is right.
And what are the main points from RFK that you think are positive, and what would you critique him on?
Well, I think his um, push for change in terms of personnel, I think that's important. I would say we have moved in a very bad direction for our health in America over the last several decades, and so having differing opinions in there, I think, is important. So that's, I think, a positive. I think from a negative perspective, I don't know that I would make that much change that quickly. I think that we're setting ourselves up for some problems when there are just so many changes at the top and all the way down, and so many people moving over and changing and being fired that not every they do lots of other things even if you don't agree with them that are also important. So I think we have a big at least as of right now, there's just a lot of positions that aren't filled, and so that could lead to some problems. But I think I don't think that it's necessarily that it's wrong to change it. I just think that maybe there's a lot being done all at once. So I don't know. That's my critique of that. I think that there's a massive push to discuss ingredients in food, and I think that's super fantastic. I think that needs to be done. I think that's kind of taken priority in a lot of senses when maybe those aren't always the most important things. Like I think there are bigger issues when it comes to our food than food dyes, but I think it's a good place to start, and it does get a lot of attention and discussion around food, which I think is very important. So I think that's by far a net positive. But I think thus far, my critique would be one, sometimes he and the team say things that are not super factual, and so they need to be a little bit more specific when they're talking on some of the areas. But I would say overall, the biggest critique of Maha in general would be the focus on some things that are smaller issues and not as much focus on some of the bigger issues, like making sure we get healthy food into the population, like bigger changes like that, food deserts, food inequality, getting food into like changes into school. Like those are some of the bigger issues that haven't been tackled as much yet. Some of the food school stuff has started to happen, but again, those are bigger issues. Those are more difficult. That's going to take more time, and I think they're starting with the stuff that they can do more easily. And so I would hope that over now the next few years, and maybe if they're there longer, they start to tackle some of the bigger issues like food in cities and getting rid of starting to get rid of dependence on ultra processed food and the big companies and try to pushing change from farmers and things like that. So a little bit of it started, but that to me are the bigger things that are going to make actual lasting change versus like in taking an ingredient. You know, you hear a lot. I don't know how much you guys hear about it. I'm sure you hear some, but like, oh, we're so happy that we're changing fructose to cane sugar, or oh, we're getting red dye 40 out of food. I'm like, that's all good. I mean, it's not bad, but that's
Mm.
not really going to change your health because the food's still bad that you're eating it in. So
Mm.
I think that's got to be the shift of like, okay, we've talked about ingredients. Let's like actually change the food now.
Yeah, and but it's been on what you're saying. It's been really celebrated in the biohacking community with the entry of RFK into the White House, and especially attacking like seed oils and trans fats. And I think there's even like a McDonald's that are going to have regenerative farmed cow meat and cook their the fries in tallow.
Right. And again, I think all of those are interesting and, you know, maybe a small benefit to the food, but ultimately it doesn't matter. You know, ultimately it doesn't. I think it matters in the sense that it's good that we're talking about it and it's good that we're seeing
Mm.
some positive change. But if you really think that McDonald's is gonna be healthy for you or they're gonna like have good practices in their farms, you know, it's like they might make it a little
Yeah.
better. They might get the certification, you know, they might
Yeah.
and I guess again, it's not bad. It's good. Like if McDonald's is better for their cows, good. Like great, you know. But that is not changing people's health, and all these things are going to do nothing ultimately
Mm.
compared to let's build a bunch of farms and cities. Let's get a bunch of people fresh food. Like that is what needs to be ultimately done to actually see health change and to see people actually cooking more and having more availability of fresh food and you know, making that food cheaper. That is what's going to change health. So that is what needs to be the long-term plan, but again, that's harder to do. I fully respect what they're doing. I think it's very net positive thus far, but
Mm.
ultimately the big things haven't been done, but I wouldn't expect them to be done. My critique would be like let's do that, you know?
All
Let's
right.
do these things first, but let's hopefully if you have enough time, let's start to tackle the big things and you know, McDonald's changing to regenerative, great, but let's actually get regenerative farms in general. Let's promote that. Let's get rid of the big farms as much as we can, and let's promote healthy food in small populations. Like that will be a real change in terms of people's health. So that's what I would love to see over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we are in a hot seat section, rapid fire. So, are you ready for it?
Yes,
All right. So, one medical myth that needs to die.
that vaccines have been proven to be not related to autism. I think that needs to go away. We need to study it.
Agree. Most underrated natural health practice for kids.
Getting outside, sunlight.
Sunlight. We are really scared about sunlight, especially Sweden, and we don't have a lot of it. So it doesn't really make sense that Swedish people are putting on sunscreen in the summer. That really bothers me.
Yeah. I think you know I think you don't want to burn, you know, so you don't want to be out for like massive amounts of times, but you don't need sunscreen just for the amounts of sun that you should be getting in general.
Yeah, and what do you think someone should do when they're living in this Nordic climate where the sun is almost like non-existent, especially during like the winter half of the year?
Yeah, I think it depends on your genetics because I think for probably the people that have been, you know, generations and generations, the genetics are probably a little better
Mm.
for that. But I think you need to get as much sunlight as you can, and then you know maybe take some vitamin D supplementation. I think if your genetics are not from there, then you're probably going to be vitamin D deficient severely, and you probably need to
Mm.
take some supplementation. And again, I think you know if you're let's say you're from Sweden and you know, you're not getting as much sunlight, and then you go to I don't know, somewhere with a lot of sunlight, like, you know, I don't know, Italy or something. Like you probably do need some sunblock then, some sunscreen. You don't
Mm.
want to burn. You shouldn't get zero sun, but I think you have to be reasonable that your body's not used to that. So
Mm.
like a zinc barrier is probably reasonable. But you know, try to go outside in the morning and the evening. Try not to spend too much time. Try to get you know in the umbrella when you're at the beach so you don't burn. But sun is not bad. Burning I think is bad.
Yeah, I agree. And most underrated natural health practice for kids.
Most well, we did sunlight, so another one would be just eating healthy.
Eating healthy. Yeah, we took that 2 times. So one
All right,
thing every
it's worth
dad
it. There are plenty of underrated things.
there are plenty of yeah, I agree. And one thing every dad should teach his kids about health.
I think you should practice what you preach. So I think you should show them that you're getting outside, that you're moving, you're eating healthy, and you're not on your screens all day.
Yeah. And if you had to choose forest school or private school?
Oh, forest school, for sure.
Awesome. And the most BS word in modern medicine?
I mean, I'll go with 3, safe and effective. I'll go with that.
I'm with you, brother. And best first aid kit item that's not a drug that everybody should have in their home.
A first aid that they should have in their home. I think colloidal silver is really good.
All right. So how do you use it?
So it's a great antibacterial, antiviral. It's what
Yeah.
you used to use often. I mean, silver was very commonly used. It still is for a lot of things. So you can
Mhm.
use it as like a throat spray, as a nose spray. You can spray it on cuts.
Mm.
It's more gentle than antibiotic, but works pretty well in general.
Yeah, I've been using it, but wanted to hear like how you use it. But you don't swallow it or you don't like take it
I don't take it
inside
as
of
like
your
a
body.
regular. I don't take it as a regular supplement. If I
Yeah.
have a sore throat, so like I have like the sprays, for me personally. So like the throat spray, the
Yeah.
nose spray. So I think if
Mm.
it's around somebody who is sick,
Yeah.
uh, start feeling ill, to me that's a good like natural antiviral, antibacterial that
Yeah.
is pretty. A lot of evidence that it's helpful.
Yeah. I never seen the throat spray. Is it the same as the nose spray, but you are spraying
Yeah,
it
same thing.
into your
It's
throat?
just yeah, it's just a liquid that's a spray. So I mean, you can just take droppers, but I think the throat spray is easier for kids usually.
Yeah. So basically, if you're traveling, you're at the airport, you spray that in your nose, or if you're at a party with a lot of people, you just like,
I do. So traveling, I always bring it with me. And if I get off the plane after, I'll just spray it in my face, spray it in my throat. There's a lot of evidence that like nose sprays and washes and things do decrease your risk of getting sick, even for COVID. I mean, there's a lot of evidence
mm,
that a nose spray with just some alcohol decreases your risk if you're exposed, which makes sense. I mean, these things have to replicate. So if you disrupt it in some way, you change them,
mm,
then it just makes it harder for them to survive.
yeah. A health practice you change your mind about.
I mean, I changed my mind a lot about vaccines. I was going back to the book. I think, and not saying that you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, like, I was very mainstream about vaccines when I first learned about them, and my mind has changed a lot as I've done research that it's a lot deeper than that. So I mean, that's why I wrote Between a Shot and a Hard Place. I mean, I think that
Mm,
we do have there is more to this story, and I think that we're doing our kids a disservice by not exploring this more.
yeah. And your wife was also a practicing doctor, right?
She's not.
Pediatrician.
She's a lawyer.
She's not.
No, she's a
She's a
lawyer.
lawyer, but she was more
She's more
holistically
holistic.
oriented.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
have you ever had an argument, and what was it about when it comes to your kids' health?
I mean, not so much other than she's even more holistic minded sometimes in terms of like not wanting them to go to certain things or, it's always a back and forth about like going to a party inside somewhere or like an event that's like, in a place where that everyone's going to get sick because you're just at a
Mm.
ball or whatever. So she's a
Yeah,
little bit more like, no, we don't need to go. And I'm like, yeah, let them go. But I mean, ultimately we usually avoid those things.
yeah. My wife would agree with your wife. Don't put them into the same place where they're gonna like play inside and everybody's gonna get sick.
Mhm.
And one thing parents can do this week to boost their kids' immunity.
Just go outside, go for a walk.
Mm. So outside is the name of the game.
I think so. I mean, we're inside way too much. We're on screens way too much. We're in, we got cars and we work inside. We're on the computer. We don't get nearly as much sunlight as people used to get.
Mm. Love that answer. It's been it's been a real pleasure having you on the show and having I really appreciate that you are nuanced and that you are sharing your content and wisdom in a way that is not confrontational. It doesn't seem that you are stirring up a lot of emotions and you have a lot of common sense. I just want to acknowledge that. And for everybody listening, wanted to get a hold of your book or your content or get in contact with you, where should they go to find you?
Yeah, thanks again for having me on and talking about this. I know, I mean, it's been great that people are willing to talk about vaccines more, but not everybody is. So I just appreciate that. For me, you can find me Instagram or X at Dr. Joel Gator, on Substack, Tweetish on the Hard Place, which is the same as my book. And you can find it on Amazon or at theshotbook.com for the book.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to put everything in the show notes. And that was all. And thank you for sharing everything. And if you have anything else to talk about that is non-vaccine related, we'll make sure to have another episode. And for everybody at home, please comment and share this episode for anybody who wants to hear what Dr. Joel has to say. So thanks again, Doctor.
Thank you.